Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 132 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Dr. Elena Lister and Dr. Michael Schwartzman for this episode. And I'm going to keep these remarks brief here today and jump right into the interview after I make just one suggestion. If you are a widowed parent, please buy this book. And if you know a widowed parent, buy it for them. Seriously. The authors cover stuff that's exactly the sort of stuff I was wondering when my husband Dennis was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and my kids were 9 and 11. So if you don't know what to say to your kids about death and grief, and let's be honest, who does? Then do yourself a favor and read this book. It's called Giving Hope, Conversations with Children about Illness, Death, and Loss. Before we jump into my discussion with Elena and Michael, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. So first of all, coming up on the show, we have some terrific guests, including in late February, we will have back for the second time Dr. Lisa D'Amour, and she'll be talking about her new book, which is called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. And this is one of those discussions that is more about general parenting, not grief specific, but with those of us who are widowed parents are also still parents, dealing with all sorts of issues, including grief. And so I think that having some guests and expert on the show who talk about parenting in general is also helpful. So her new book is called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. And if you want to get to know Lisa's work a bit first, do check out my interview with her, my first interview with her. It was way back in episode 13. So I don't know, it might sound a little cringy, as the kids like to say, or cringeworthy, I suppose, as I might say. Or check out her book, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood. Terrific book. If you have a daughter who is maybe around 4th, 5th, 6th grade, it's time to, I think it would be helpful to read that and get ahead of some of the stuff that is coming. And finally, if you are on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, be sure to follow me at LiskJenny. It's a new year. It's 2023 now. And so I'm going to start sharing more resources and information for my listeners over there on social media. So do go and follow me now so you won't miss any of that. All right, that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guests today are Dr. Elena Lister and Dr. Michael Schwartzman. Elena and Michael are co-authors of the new book, Giving Hope, Conversations with Children about Illness, Death, and Loss. Elena is Associate Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center and Senior Consulting Analyst for Grief at Columbia Psychoanalytic Center. She treats adults and children facing all life issues and specializes in grief and is a frequently sought-out expert on dealing with loss in schools across the country. Michael is a senior psychologist and board-certified psychoanalyst and has worked with children, adolescents, adults, and families for more than 40 years. In addition to his private practice, he is the consulting psychologist at 2 independent schools for children and lectures regularly to parents and professional colleagues on child development, parenting, and school-related issues. So all of that is a very long way of saying that we have 2 bona fide experts with us here today, a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So Elena and Michael, welcome to you both.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I've really been looking forward to speaking with you guys today. And I think that your book, well, I have a lot to say about it, but I'll summarize it as saying that it's incredibly useful for myself, and I think for my listeners, because my listeners, as you know, are widowed parents who have babies through college age at home. And, I'm just going to jump right into my first question, which is entirely rhetorical. But where was this book in 2015 when I needed it?
Shall I try to answer that?
Sure, why not?
Okay. 2019, 2015.
2015.
Okay,
yes.
yeah. 2015, yeah. So maybe it was a latent idea. What was happening in my practice was that I was dealing with the kind of situations you had to face. And I would be speaking and talking about how to handle things with children and within themselves for people who were facing a dying spouse, for example. And they would say, "Do you have this written down anywhere?" And I kept hearing this and I kept thinking, no, and I haven't found it in this way before. And so there was this idea growing of maybe I could write a book. And I was like, could I write a book? Yeah, maybe I could write a book about this. And then I approached Michael and I said, any chance you'd like to write a book with me about helping children deal with illness, death, and loss? And to my delight, he said, yeah, I'll do that with you.
Yeah.
And so that gets us to 2019, which is when we started before the pandemic. But I appreciate the intent behind your question. There are a lot of people out there who are hurting who didn't have a resource.
Yeah. Well, and one of the first things that I did was go over to Amazon and type in, right? Like, where's the book that's going to tell me what to do here? And I wasn't finding anything. And actually, that's one of the reasons I started going out and interviewing people. But seriously, the stuff you cover in the book is exactly the sort of stuff that I was wondering about. My husband was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and he died, and my kids were 9 and 11. And I think that, what I wondered about when worried about is what my listeners worry about and wonder about, right? Like, do I tell them that the doctors can't fix it? How do I tell them? When do I tell them? Do I let them see him if he's confused, right? Like all these things. And they feel so, to me, it felt like, well, there's got to be a right answer. Like, do I tell them or do I not tell them? One of those feels like it must be right, but I don't know which one, right? and it feels like the consequences of picking the wrong one just felt, like they might be high. So one of the things I noticed in your book, and I'll quote here, it says, it's a natural reaction for parents to want to protect their children from the unpleasant realities of life. We all do that, and yet it's not a realistic strategy. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. In the context of what you're saying, Elena and I came into this having had very practical experiences together and individually, where, this is the topic. And knowing that there's very little written about this, there's very little resource, we wanted to develop a book that would be a go-to basically for anything that you could think of, for everything that you could think of when you were looking for those kinds of answers. And, we're very clear there is no right answer. There are conversations you can have where you can entertain answers that you can always go back to, and rework as you rework the concern. But it's very much, in the spirit of how you're thinking. Protecting a child involves helping them to deal with the issue. It's more, how do you explain it? How do you bring it in so that they can understand it? How do you set up the conversation that you want to have in which you could make those kinds of answers? Because a child is best protected when they have an honest answer about what's going on. I'm sure Elena can add to that. I mean, you with your first question or your second question, it's open sesame. I mean, it's
yeah. Well, and so and you mentioned that something about there not being right answers, I think, and yet you gave us in the book, you give us one cardinal rule. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, if it's the one, I think we have what we call best practices, and there are a few of them, but one that talks about this in particular is tell the truth, nothing but the truth, but not necessarily the whole truth, at least not all at once. So
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Is that the one that you had in mind? Is that the one you had in mind?
Similar. I wrote down the one cardinal rule: you should never lie. Period.
Okay. Yes. Basically, yes. Yeah. No secrets. And so unpack it a bit. We believe that children sense when things are going on, even if nothing is told to them. And that it is best not to leave a child emotionally alone with things that they are trying to understand that could be scary or sad or upsetting. And so if you don't tell the truth, if you lie, you're basically leaving a child alone with something that they sense may not be exactly what you're telling them. Many children feel the discrepancy between what's going on around them and what you're telling them, if what you have to tell them is something really sad or really difficult, like daddy's dying. But but if you don't say that and everybody around is exuding an air of distress and sadness and upset, and yet the child is being told, no, daddy's doing okay, then they're in this world where, wait a minute, that doesn't match. And then, they're alone because they don't have the information, but they're also alone. They're emotionally in a different place than you are. And I think it's really isolating for a child. And also, they learn not to trust you to tell the truth to them. And so if you tell the truth when a child is younger, we have found over the years that leads to a child believing that you will tell the truth, but you've been through hard stuff with them. You've stayed with them through the hard stuff, and so you will stay with them through other hard stuff as well. And that means that they can come to you with the hard stuff that comes later on in life when they hit their teens, when they hit their 20s and 30s, and and so on. And that they believe that you respected them enough to tell them what was really going on. I also think if it's a terminally ill parent, for example, it's a lost opportunity, because we talk in the book about the fact that if you know that someone is dying, parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, pet, whatever it is, you have the opportunity to, it's a gift of time in a way, and to help a child, if you're the adult in the scene, help a child be with that person who is dying in some way, and to get to show that person their love and get to receive that love from them. And they get to then carry forward, the child gets to carry forward more, moving past the death, because they've had a deep and intimate experience with the person who's dying. And it's painful, but in that pain is intimacy and authenticity and the ways in which we express a lot of love. So, and I think it's a gift to the dying person as well, because they get a chance to be with the child in a really honest way. And that's so much closer. So that's a lot.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think we could go off in about 5 different directions now, but on all the really, I think, important points that you've made here. And so one of them, because sometimes I hear, people they think that protecting their kids might mean, might look like, oh, let's let them have a normal, happy childhood or something, and not bother them with their mother's or their father's terminal illness, like that kind of thing. And I hear that can backfire. Can you tell us, like, what might happen? Like, let's say one of the parents is terminally ill and the kid isn't told about it. Have you seen that backfire?
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, first of all, I think let's be square about it. The other person in the formula is the parent. And so when the parent is making the judgment, I want my child to have the full childhood, not be burdened, they're also thinking about themselves and what it means to themselves to have to bear up under now the weight of the child knowing. And I think we have found that that's a very seminal part of, what can guide a parent. So in many ways, we want our book to be able to support a parent who's learning how to bear what it feels like to be talking about this, on behalf of the child, at the same time as they're bearing it for themselves. That's a very, very critical juncture point. I mean, because you're literally asked to be two people in a situation like that, somebody who's taking care of yourself and somebody who's taking care of your child at the same time. So, I mean, when you think about it like that, what's the pitfall when you don't talk about it? In addition to the way Elena was describing, living authentically and living, in the moment of what's actually going on, it can become a very estranged, picture of life where a child, as Elena described, who has the sensation that more is going on, but doesn't know how to explain it, doesn't know how to understand it, growing within that, loses out on all of these opportunities where, they can, yes, face the pain that's probably there anyway, but face it more with the tools that comes from that kind of guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think another pitfall I can think of is that a child later on, if they learned, I mean, children are going to grow up and they're going to put it together that there was a time when, let's say it's terminally ill, parents die of all sorts of reasons. You had to face your husband being terminally ill. They're going to grow up, and at some point, they're going to realize that there was a period of time during which they were with a parent who was dying, and they didn't know, and feel, I think, betrayed and angry. This has been my experience talking with people later. You didn't tell me. I didn't get a chance to, and then whatever it was. And often a child can feel guilty. Maybe they were unkind to the parent who was dying. I don't want to spend time with you or something. Kids can have a mood. I'd rather be with my friend, something like that. And had they known the parent was dying, they may still have been, unkind or whatever in that moment, but it's a different orientation. There's a sense that there's something precious happening here, and we want to hold on to it and as best we can until we can't. And so I think children later on grow up, and also they feel, as I was suggesting before, uncertain. So next time you tell them, oh no, so-and-so's doing fine, do they believe you? Probably not.
Yeah, and that bond of trust with the surviving parent is so important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's an interesting point. One of the things I'm hearing you say is that even if you try to keep something from kids, they're very perceptive. And even if they maybe can't figure out exactly what's going on, they might be getting the sense that things aren't quite adding up, and the adults are being quiet when I come in the room, or talking in hushed tones, or something isn't right here.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give you, it's not for a widowed parent, but an example. There's a book which I referred to a bunch. It's called Armfuls of Time. It's about dying children, interviews with dying children. And to a child, this is the examples in the book, but they're real examples from actual cases. The child says, I know I'm dying, a child, but mommy and daddy won't talk to me about it. They get too upset. So I'm not going to, ask them about it. They tell the nurses in the hospital this. And so imagine how alone, right?
Yeah.
And how unfortunate that is, because a child senses, they're keen observers, nonverbal cues. They overhear things, or they get the whispers, as soon as they enter a room. And so since they can imagine all sorts of horrible things, if something really horrible is happening in your family, that may seem pretty horrible. They may imagine something worse. Maybe one parent is dying. Maybe they imagine both are. So you're leaving them to fester with their own imagination to fill in a blank because they know something is wrong. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the examples you gave in the book was the parents didn't want to upset the child that the grandmother was terminally ill. And they thought they would keep the news from her, but the kid overheard things and misinterpreted and thought that her own mother was dying, not her mother's mother.
Right. Exactly.
Right. The elaboration that a person can go into not knowing what's going on can often be much worse than having to bear up to and learn how to deal with what is going on. But the common denominator is something's going on and you want to help. I mean, who better to prepare your child than you?
Right.
I think also for the parent, if you're not telling them the truth, you're constantly strategically managing what you're saying. Okay, wait, no, they don't know that. So I have to change the conversation. And I think that does lead to something stilted between a parent and a child, because a parent is holding a secret that the child can't know, and they don't want to let it slip. And it makes them vigilant about that because they're worried, And so I think our goal in the book is to help promote as much closeness with your child as you can have. And we believe that's based in honesty. The other thing is that if a child, how do you learn that you can handle hard stuff? They say, what is the measure of a person? Not how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up after you've fallen. And the way a child learns that they can get back up after they fall is if you allow them to face hard stuff. And as Michael was saying, with you there, and as best you can be. And then they learn, okay, I can get through hard stuff. I got through really hard stuff. And they face the rest of life with a sense of an inner strength. I faced something really hard and I came through it. And I think that's a valuable feeling to have about oneself.
Yeah.
But just in line with what we're talking about, we also make it very clear, we feel very strongly, an understanding of why it's very hard to tell a child. And not only why it's very hard to tell a child, but to tell yourself as you're telling a child, which in many ways can make it more real and more potent. So we go to great lengths to talk both about what you can do to prepare yourself and the significance of that, the way you take care of yourself. And then, did it freeze? And then,
no, I think just the video is freezing. I think we're good on the audio.
Okay. And then what you can do to create the conversation in spite of the fact that it's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. Yeah, let's get into that actually, because one of the things you talk about is how adults should take some time, even if it's a few moments, but to think through their own thoughts on this topic, on the illness, on the death, on the loss before they start talking with their kids. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Because we recognize that, when you're talking about the widowed parent, you're talking about a person who's experiencing what they're experiencing on their own behalf as a person, and then also what they're experiencing on behalf of their child and the caregiver to their child, not to mention the spouse and all the other emotional, connections involved here. But we talk extensively about taking care of yourself as getting clarity, getting grounded in how, all of this is impacting you. Because you can only act on behalf of your child as well as you can act on behalf of yourself. So if we isolate out and we really encourage the idea that you're going to take care of yourself to get yourself grounded, you're going to do what you have to do for your child. But to get into it with your child on behalf of your child, you want to clarify what's going on for you. You want to get your own help from your friends, from whoever it is, so that, you can connect with yourself and then ultimately distinguish between what you see your child is experiencing and what you're exexperiencing. So you can focus in on the child. I think that's paramount.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I would add into that, we believe that we're all affected by losses we've had before. So facing a loss, and a parent if they can take that moment, has the opportunity to think, okay, I'm responding to this. And what am I feeling about this? And this is reminding me of when my grandmother died, my father died, my uncle died, whatever it is, because very few people get through to adulthood without some kind of loss. And that, I remember that experience. And one, you don't, sometimes, you have painful memories of how you were dealt with as a child when there was a loss in the family, and that's getting activated. And it could determine how you approach your child. But if you're aware of it, you can use that intentionally. Oh, this is tapping into some anger I have. I remember that, And so the more self-aware you are, as Michael was saying, the more you can deal with your own noise. And then when you're talking with your child, hear your child more clearly.
Yeah. Okay. That's really helpful. And then I think one of the things, kind of related to this, you start to think about, okay, now you're going to talk to your kids. People wonder about, crying in front of your kids or not, or and you said something interesting in the book about, in general, you recommend trying to stay at least 2 shades less emotional than your child. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah. I think if you think about it, it would be so weird if you didn't show emotion about the loss of a child's parent, a spouse, a partner, in front of your child. In a sense, it's an opportunity to model. Yes, we show emotion. Emotion is okay. Emotion is natural. We're all going to have emotions, and there are going to be all kinds of emotions. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be anger. There's going to be numb. There's going to be confusion. There's going to be anxiety, all those kinds of things. So one is to basically make it okay for your child to and to help them learn that expressing emotion is okay, but how far to go with it. Okay, so as a parent, if you're losing your partner, you are wrecked inside and may feel like keening, sobbing, wailing. That we think could be overwhelming for a child, because when you're doing that, you can't really attend to the child. So if you stay 2 or 3 steps more measured than your child, you're leaving room that you can be with your own deep emotion and also keep your child in mind.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, right. So, right. And not having them maybe be feeling unstable, perceiving that you can't handle it or something because you're right. Okay, gotcha. And then just staying really practical here for a minute. Let's say you have multiple kids, and let's say maybe they're very different ages from each other. Are we talking to all the kids together? Are we talking to them each separately? How do you approach that?
Yeah, we talk about that in the book. The originating idea is that you want to all be together. So you're trying to talk to everybody together. So you take the common denominator of the younger child and you try to explain things from the younger child's point of view so that they can understand it. But then practically speaking, you have other conversations at the same time. And it's not that you're leaving the younger child out, but it's that you want to be open to questions that might come up from an older child that a younger child wouldn't really be experienced enough to have. Not that you want to exclude your child, but it might be that the older child wants the alone time, and the opportunity because they have concerns about how they're going to be affecting, their sibling as well. But from a very practical point of view, while we want to promote the sense of togetherness, the sense of openness, the sense of honesty, we also want to be able to answer in ways that are understandable to each child. And, you build on that as you go along.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, this reminds me, because I want to ask about funerals next, but so far we've been kind of using the word child, and I'm using air quotes that listeners can't see here, sort of generically. And child can span from, like was born yesterday up and through 18 or however years old. So when we're
50,
talking
60.
Yeah, right. There you go. But when we're talking about talking with children, if you're going to have a conversation, are we talking about being honest with every age of child? What are you telling a 3-year-old that somebody died? Talk to us about, that issue a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, in a way, the answer to that is yes. You are talking to a 3-year-old about the fact that somebody died. And I know that may seem really hard to a lot of people. Child's too young. They don't need to learn about that. It'll be too upsetting. A common fear is that that child will then be always scared of everybody dying. And our response to that is that then if you've talked about it honestly and your child is scared of other dyings, well, one, we offer you a way to talk to your child about that. And it promotes more togetherness. The antidote to loss is connection. So even the 3-year-old needs to be connected to the family when something this big is going on, and the 18-year-old. And so while our book is really geared to, let's say, 3 to 10, a lot of the principles apply for a 2.5-year. I have a 2.5-year-old I just was working with a family about, who's asking, where is daddy? Where is daddy? Where is daddy? And, so a 2.5-year-old needs to know something honest about what happened.
Right.
And although teens have their own way and so on, and we sometimes talk about writing a book number 2 about talking with teens in this kind of stuff.
Oh, you should. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of the principles apply because you want to be honest with the teen. You want to do your own stuff before you talk to your teenagers. So really, it's not set for a particular age group. I think the thing that is hardest for people to feel at ease with is the young.
Right,
I think a child, Michael, tell me if you concur with this, but if a child is asking, whatever age they are, if they're asking where somebody who died is, they deserve an honest answer about it.
Yeah. I mean, so another, just to add to that, another one of our points is, know your child. So the idea is, what does your child understand? How do they like to hear things? Do they like to cuddle at the same time? If the antidote is togetherness, the language you're using, which is so connected to how emotional people get, it's not so much for the information as it is for conveying that you can handle this together, you can be together in the face of it. And when they ask you questions, and I think that's where your question goes, what do you actually say? You say what you think your child can bear, but you try to give it with the ingredients of the truth. So you might, and we've talked about this recently, where you have a child who's asking, they almost sound like gory questions. And you answer the gory you tell them what they want to hear, not that they want to hear it, but what they're asking for, because you want to show them that respect, that consideration, and then you work with how they feel with the answer.
Yeah. Kids get curious about death, so they may ask very concrete, does somebody burp after they die? Those kinds of things. And it's disconcerting for us adults. But that we believe, you stay steady with that and answer it as best you can.
And if you know that you can go back to the question again, so you say something and then you notice how they're reacting, and then you say something more to your child to try to address that part.
We also believe that you don't shy away from the word died.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to spend a second on that, but because that's common parlance and it's very confusing. He went away. He's gone. He's gone is really confused. Are they coming back?
Right.
And if you say, oh no, where's Sarah? She went out to the store. She's gone. She's gone. She went out to the store. They get all confused.
Right.
So to use the language, because it's what everybody else will be speaking about. And if you introduce it, you're basically saying, we don't need to be scared of this word. The word is not what happened. The word is the name for what happened. And the Buddhists talk about things being signless, meaning that the name is just a name. We use that word because it conveys something. And then we can all talk about it together in the same way.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah.
Then that makes sense. And Michael, you said something that made me think you're talking about, I think, revisiting a question Which seems like it could also be in a case where maybe I as a parent feel like, gee, I screwed something up, right? Maybe I did lie to them. Maybe I did, not tell them that it was suicide. I told them it was a heart attack or something. Is it a good idea to try to go back and revisit that discussion if you're in that kind of position?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the saving grace. I mean, I think that knowing your child, wanting to protect the crowd from having to feel terrible feelings, even though they are feeling terrible feelings, prompts a person to try to use and select their words and be careful about what they say, because they want to kind of like filter and comfort at the same time. So you say something, you see how it goes, you think about it afterwards, you make a realization that there's something you would have thought differently or preferred to say. And yes, you definitely go back. Remember when we were talking about da-da-da-da, and I said da-da, I thought about it some more, and I want to add to that now and tell you more about this. Or did that make sense to you what I said before? And then they tell you that we're always saying, we didn't say this yet, we always say take the lead from the child. That we take the child's understanding of what we've said from how they respond. So if you listen very carefully to the way they respond, you can then add your words to where they're growing towards and how they're reaching, to join you with what you're trying to say. But definitely, yes, you have the grace of being able to go back and correct yourself for the things that you could have said better the next time.
All of us are not perfect parents. You're going to say things that you mess up. I've done mess ups. And what you teach your child when you go back and say, I'm not happy with how I put that, or I'm sorry I said this in a way that was really unclear. You're teaching your child that people make mistakes and you can go back and try and address them in a relationship. And I think that's another good modeling thing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. And the sense I'm getting from some of this too is if the parent is approaching this with a frame of mind of letting their child's questions guide the discussion, then that seems like a helpful frame of mind. And if the kid, is out of questions, then maybe that's it for that discussion. And this isn't like a one and done conversation, right?
Right. Where you say it's a process, it's many conversations. The many conversations at the time someone died, and the next year, and 2 years later, and when the child graduates high school, and when the child gets married, and all through, because at each developmental stage, a child reconsiders things that happened before. So they're going to revisit a major loss like this and think about it now with their 10-year-old mind if it happened when they were 8. And so, and you always offer, do you have any questions? And, we're in favor of being direct and say, if you don't now, let's go make macaroni and cheese for lunch. And if you have any other time, whatever time it is, day or night, you can come and find me, and I'll try to help you find an answer to your question. Yeah.
And you're sending that message that the door is open to these difficult topics.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So important. Okay. We could keep talking about this all day. I don't know if we started out by saying this in the beginning, but literally we could, there's so much good stuff in here, but I do want to ask you a couple more things if you don't mind, before we do run out of time here. Sending your kid back to school. I think that's one of the things that people struggle with. Do they go back right away? Do they stay out a long time? Is it somewhere in between? Like, how should you start thinking about and approaching that kind of question?
So, we think a lot about the benefit of regular life when life has become so altered by, a death. Children tend to like being able to just be with their friends, be distracted by their activities, be involved with their learning, regular life. And so we talk a lot about the idea that as things work their way through and you've done what you're doing, in terms of taking care of the loss and being together, you think and you try very hard to work constructively and collaboratively with your child's school to put together a plan, where the child can go back and, have what they can have, as they can be in school. And most schools, are very open and very thoughtful about this and will help a family transition a child, back into school. But we're very mindful of the idea that bringing back regular life is a way of supporting a child, as they're experiencing, their grief in the time in the time of a loss. So we're very open to all of that.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. Yeah, because I think that's a tricky one to figure out how to handle. And one of the things I'm wondering too is whether parents should maybe go and try to speak with the teacher, speak with the other kids. And I think, Elena, you had an example, a little different case, but of speaking with your kids' classmates when your daughter was terminally ill many years ago.
Yes, I did. And, that was something that made my daughter, who was terminally ill, mad. That's my private stuff, and you're going to talk to all of, her sister's classmates about it. But we also thought this is happening to our older child too, and she needs the support. So yeah, and we were grateful the school allowed that, and it was the start of my working with schools moving forward because it wasn't typical. But yeah, we found a classroom of third graders, 8-year-olds, 100 and something odd of them, all very able to sit and talk with us about the fact that their classmate's sister was at home dying. And then the school was able to be very supportive of my daughter, who was well, because we'd had a sort of joint experience together about it, and everybody knew and everybody was talking about it honestly. So they were able to keep an eye on her in a different kind of way. And it built a bridge of communication. Key is communication with the school before your child goes back to school and after as well, in an ongoing way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing about that. I think parents don't necessarily, I don't know if I necessarily anticipated how awkward it might be for my kids, if the other kids hadn't maybe had some coaching, or, if there's a huge elephant in the room, right? I know kids often complain that, their friends won't talk to them anymore because it's too awkward and they don't know what to say. They just want to be treated like a regular kid, and everything's gotten super weird. So it seems like maybe parents being aware that could be a thing and thinking about how to try to head that off could be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. We have some thoughts about that in the book. How to help a child learn to talk about it when they get back to school with their friends. And if your child is not the one who had the loss, how to help a friend be able to talk to a child who's had a loss.
Oh, good. Very important. Okay. Well, and I am going to put a link, of course, to the book in the show notes because I want listeners to go and read it and think about it. And because there also are a lot of parts that we aren't going to be able to get to today. There's so much concrete, I guess I would say, and practical information that I think a lot of parents are really hungry for. So yeah, go buy the book, everyone. I did want to. Yeah, of course. So funerals, kids there's no such thing as too young to go to a funeral.
I think we would say this, as Michael was talking about, know your child. It is something to talk about with your child. And we would advocate that you explain to the child what's going to happen there and what people will be wearing, who will be there, what will get said as best you can know. Will the coffin be there or not? And then encourage as though the child's going to go. And if a child says, I can't do that. I don't want to go. You think about, okay, is there anything that could make it more doable for you? What if you sat with your friend? Or what if you were able to bring a toy with you? Or what, and so on. And sometimes it can be made doable for a child who's scared about it or thinks they're going to be overwhelmed. And if not, we would never want a child to feel badly that they don't feel up to going. So, okay, if it really feels clear that a lot of thought's been put into it, there's just no way this child is going to be able to be okay going, that we say, we're going to find a way for you to participate. and that child can draw a picture or write something that someone says, so that they know when they're older that they participated in some way. And then when the family gets back, you talk with the child who didn't go about what happened. And so that they aren't left out of the experience. But we don't believe it's damaging. In fact, what a child sees at a funeral is that community gathers, and that your family isn't alone. There are other people who loved and cared about the person who died, or them, or you, parent, and everybody gathers together to, support each other and pay attention and honor the person who died. So I think it can be reassuring to a child, not overwhelming only.
Gotcha.
We also have a thing that if your child is there, and it's always good to have an adult who's a little bit apart out of the scene available, so that you, parent, can grieve and be at that funeral for yourself and keep an eye on your child. But there's another adult who's really minding and keeping an eye on your child. If the child needs to leave, can go outside and play.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. I'm going to refer listeners to the book Tips About Talking with Kids About Suicide, using books and movies to jumpstart dialogues, talking about deaths and things like that in the news, a whole bunch of things that I know we're not going to have time to get to. I did want to, though, ask about one thing real quick. You mentioned if your kid is having trouble engaging with regular activities 4 to 6 weeks out, engaging in the kind of regular life, that might be a good time to seek professional help. I thought that was interesting, useful yardstick.
We don't think that there's anything wrong with a child who's showing, a great deal of upset, apathy, depressed mood. I mean, these are natural consequences of something very real. But we also recognize that the situation can be very, very difficult. And it might be useful, not in terms of, quote, mental illness, but in terms of support and health, to consult with, a child psychiatrist, a child psychologist, maybe even asking a pediatrician. If there's more, ways in which a child can be supported. And often that can mean a parent is talking with the mental health person, just to bring more ideas in there and to also be reassuring to a parent that there isn't something terribly wrong.
Right.
So yes, we talk about, the idea of paying attention, but there's nothing inherently wrong with an extended, low feeling.
Yeah.
I think we come up with 4 to 6 weeks because the goal is to figure out how to integrate this loss into ongoing life. And that at some point, even with your pain, you hopefully re-engage in life. And for a child, re-engaging in life is school. And that means going to some activities, even if it's less so. So after 4 to 6 weeks, if a child isn't doing that kind of thing, if they just want to be at your side and so on, they're not having the opportunity to experience the fact that you can go to school and still grieve.
Yeah.
You can, and mommy or daddy or aunt or uncle will be there, and you'll come back and, you can refuel that way.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting and important nuance. It's not like you're saying, oh, they shouldn't still be grieving in 6 weeks. You're saying, they could be grieving and engaging in life. And it's that, are they having trouble engaging or not, that may be a marker for when to seek some support. Yeah. Okay,
exactly.
Great. I would like to wrap up today by asking you each to leave us with one parting thought, if you don't mind, please. And Michael, let's start with you. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to us?
I'd say take care of yourself. I'd say look into, how you are being through a very long time struggle and difficulty with your loved one's health. Take a look at yourself and take care of yourself. Stay close to your children. Take care of yourself. and then it will be easier for you to take care of your child. And this will ease over time.
Okay, thank you. And Elena?
A question I get a lot in my practice is, are my children going to be okay? And I think the answer to that is basically yes, that a child can go through the loss of a parent early in life and come out just fine. It doesn't mean that they don't have pain. It doesn't mean that they aren't grieving, and that in some way they will grieve for that parent for the rest of their lives, but that they can find joy in ongoing life, and they can grow, and they can learn that having engagement in life is can be consistent with also grieving and honoring the person who died. So yes, you and your child or children can come out of this okay. And the basis for that really starts with the honesty and the togetherness.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. So my guests today are Dr. Elena Lister and Dr. Michael Schwartzman, co-authors of the new book, Giving Hope, Conversations with Children About Illness, Death, and Loss. So Elena, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Well, I now have a website, which I'd never had before. But when you make a book, apparently you need a website.
Absolutely.
So it's ElenaListerMD.com.
Okay.
And I'm also now on Twitter and Instagram a little. I'm learning about that. Twitter, I have mixed feelings about, but it's all that is in my website anyway. And it has other things I've written and stuff like that.
Great. Yeah. And I'm going to put a link to you guys recently had a column in the Post, Washington Post. I think it was about the holidays. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes as well. And so, Michael, where can people find you?
So I'm at michaelschwartzmanphd.com. Just like that. Otherwise, we're both in New York City, working away in our offices.
Terrific. All right. Well, Elena and Michael, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
It was such a pleasure. Jenny, thank you for having us, really.
Pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Elena Lister and Dr. Michael Schwartzman as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 132. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.